In the blistering heat of the early 1980s, Stephen King was the undisputed king of popular fiction, and any adaptation of his work was a cinematic event. When Universal Pictures announced a film based on his novel Firestarter, the potential seemed limitless. The story was pure high-concept dynamite. A little girl born from a secret government experiment who possessed the terrifying power of a demigod. Fresh from captivating the world in E.T. the Extraterrestrial, America's New Sweetheart, Drew Barrymore was cast in the lead role. The stage was set for a blockbuster. Yet, the film that emerged is one of Hollywood's most fascinating paradoxes, a movie plagued by studio politics, a last-minute change in creative vision, and the enduring scorn of its own creator. It is a story of what might have been. These 30 facts excavate the turbulent production, the on-set dramas, and the smoldering cultural legacy of a film that, despite its flaws, introduced a fiery new trope to cinema and refused to be extinguished from memory. 1. Based on Stephen King's novel. The film draws its narrative directly from Stephen King's 1980 novel, a work that masterfully blended sci-fi suspense with the emotional core of a father-daughter relationship on the run. Unlike some adaptations that take broad liberties, Stanley Mann's screenplay adheres closely to the novel's structure. It faithfully recreates the story of Charlie and Andy McGee, who are hunted by the sinister government agency, The Shop, after a college drug trial grants them psychic powers. The film preserves the novel's key plot points, from their initial flight to their tragic confrontation at the shop's headquarters, attempting to translate King's page-turning tension directly to the screen. Second Pyrokinesis film. While Telekinesis had its iconic cinematic moment with Carrie, Firestarter holds the crucial distinction of being the first major motion picture to build its entire premise around pyrokinesis. It established the visual lexicon for this power: the intense stare, the wind whipping through the user's hair, and the spontaneous eruption of flames. Before Firestarter, this specific psychic ability was largely confined to comic books and literature. The film set a precedent that would influence countless future characters, from the X-Men's Pyro to characters in modern franchises, effectively making it the cinematic genesis of the fire-wielding psychic. 3. John Carpenter's departure. In what is now considered a monumental what-if in horror history, Firestarter was originally slated to be directed by the legendary John Carpenter. He was set to re-team with screenwriter Bill Lancaster, with whom he had just created the masterpiece of paranoia, The Thing. However, in one of horror's greatest ironies, the film now hailed as a classic was a critical and commercial disaster in 1982. Panicked by the financial loss, Universal Studios executives deemed Carpenter too much of an artistic risk. They fired him and Lancaster from Firestarter, seeking a safer, more commercially straightforward vision and inadvertently altering the film's creative destiny. Fourth Mark L. Lester's Takeover. In a clear pivot from Carpenter's atmospheric style, the studio hired Mark L. Lester, a director whose reputation was built on raw, often violent, exploitation films like the punk rock thriller Class of 1984. Lester's approach was less about suspense and more about visceral impact and action. This stylistic shift is precisely what Stephen King would later condemn, arguing that Lester delivered the spectacle but stripped the story of its soul. In King's own scathing words, the direction was flavorless, prioritizing pyrotechnics over the novel's deep-seated, character-driven horror. 5. Dino De Laurentiis production. The driving force behind the film was the larger-than-life Italian producer Dino De Laurentiis. He shelled out a staggering $1 million for the novel's rights, a testament to King's literary dominance, and made Firestarter the inaugural project for his ambitious new American production venture. De Laurentiis envisioned creating a Hollywood-style studio on the East Coast, and Firestarter was the flagship he chose to launch his North Carolina-based empire, which would go on to produce a string of other 1980s genre films. 6. Wilmington's Film Hub launch. Filmed in the autumn of 1983, Firestarter was more than just a movie. It was the birth of an industry. As the very first production to be shot at De Laurentiis's newly constructed studios and registered with the North Carolina Film Office, it single-handedly kick-started Wilmington's transformation into a major filmmaking hub. The infrastructure built for the film and the local talent trained on its set laid the groundwork for the city to become Hollywood East, hosting iconic productions like Blue Velvet and Dawson's Creek for decades to come. 7. Orton Plantation setting. The exteriors for the shop's menacing headquarters were filmed at the beautiful and historic Orton Plantation. For the film's explosive climax, Dino De Laurentiis, in a move that epitomized his audacious producing style, offered to buy the entire 18th-century estate from its owners for the sole purpose of burning the main house to the ground on camera. The owners, horrified, flatly refused. Undeterred, the production team meticulously constructed a large-scale facade of the mansion nearby, which they then spectacularly obliterated for the final sequence. 8. Drew Barrymore's Breakout. Fresh from becoming America's most beloved child star in E.T., 9-year-old Drew Barrymore was not the studio's only choice, but a chance observation secured her the role. Her mother, Jade Barrymore, noticed her daughter's uncanny resemblance to the illustrated girl on the novel's paperback cover and lobbied hard for the part. Barrymore's casting proved to be the film's greatest strength. She delivered a performance of startling intensity, convincingly portraying both the innocent, vulnerable child and the furious, godlike being capable of immense destruction. 9. George C. Scott's Miscasting. The casting of the legendary George C. Scott as the Native American assassin John Rainbird was immediately controversial and represents a glaring example of Hollywood whitewashing. The character in King's novel is explicitly Cherokee, and his heritage is central to his worldview. Stephen King was vocally displeased, having pushed for an actor like James Woods, whom he felt could better embody the character's serpentine intensity and manipulative nature. Scott's performance was praised for its menace, but the casting choice remains a significant blemish on the film's legacy. 10. Scott's eye patch. The eye patch worn by John Rainbird in the film's latter half was not a creative choice, but a medical necessity. During production, George C. Scott suffered a painful corneal abrasion from a contact lens, leading to a severe eye infection. Rather than shut down filming and wait for the acclaimed but notoriously difficult actor to heal, the filmmakers improvised. They wrote the eye patch into the script, seamlessly incorporating a real-life injury into his character's intimidating appearance and allowing production to continue without delay. 11. Martin Sheen's last-minute role. The role of Captain Hollister, the calculating head of the shop, was originally given to Hollywood titan Burt Lancaster. However, just before he was due on set, Lancaster had to undergo emergency quadruple bypass heart surgery, forcing him to withdraw. In a scramble to fill the crucial role, Martin Sheen was hired as a last-minute replacement. He arrived on set with only days to prepare, stepping into the shoes of the film's primary human antagonist and giving a performance of cold, bureaucratic evil. 12. Heather Locklear's small part. At the peak of her Dynasty fame, Heather Locklear's casting as Charlie's mother, Vicky, was a major selling point. However, audiences who knew the book were left disappointed by her brief appearance. The screenplay controversially excised the novel's extensive flashbacks, which detailed Andy and Vicky's love story and their shared trauma from the Lot 6 experiment. This decision reduced Vicky's role to a fridged character, killed off in the opening minutes to motivate the male protagonist, a move that stripped the story of significant emotional weight. 13. David Keith's criticism. While Barrymore's performance garnered acclaim, Stephen King was deeply unsatisfied with her on-screen father. He publicly criticized David Keith's portrayal of Andy McGee, the psychic father trying to protect his daughter. In a candid 1986 interview with American Film, King declared the performance not very good, arguing that Keith failed to convey the profound desperation, exhaustion, and tortured love that defined the character on the page, resulting in a performance that felt emotionally flat. 14. Art Carney's farmer role. Adding a touch of classic Hollywood gravitas, the beloved Art Carney, an Oscar winner for Harry and Tonto, played the small but pivotal role of Irv Manders. As the gentle farmer who offers the fugitive father and daughter a brief moment of peace and kindness, Carney provided the film with its soul. His warm, empathetic performance created a powerful emotional anchor, making the violent intrusion of the shop into his idyllic world all the more shocking and heartbreaking for the audience. 15. Tangerine Dream's score. The film's atmospheric electronic score was composed by the German synth pioneers Tangerine Dream. In a testament to their reputation, they were given near-total creative freedom, composing the entire score in their Berlin studio without seeing a single frame of the film. They sent the finished music to the production on tapes. The result is an iconic 1980s synth soundscape, pulsating, moody, and futuristic. However, many critics felt this detached process led to a score that was emotionally disconnected from the on-screen drama, sounding more robotic than resonant. 16. Fire effects, challenges. The film's centerpiece was its pyrotechnics, a massive undertaking that consumed $3 million of the budget. The crew, led by effects coordinator Mike Wood, used a combination of controlled propane bursts and chemical explosives to bring Charlie's power to life. The signature effect of wind whipping through Charlie's hair before an eruption was a direct suggestion from Stephen King himself. Ironically, King would later join critics in mocking the final result, feeling the on-screen effect looked more like a cheap hairdryer trick than a manifestation of psychic power. 17. Child labor limits. The logistical nightmare of filming complex, dangerous, and lengthy night scenes with a 9-year-old star was navigated with clever filmmaking tricks. Strict child labor laws prevented Drew Barrymore from working late hours. For many of the wide shots during the fiery finale and other nocturnal sequences, the production used a little person, 29-year-old stuntwoman Des Ryan, as Barrymore's body double. This allowed the crew to continue filming the hazardous pyrotechnics long after their young star had gone home. 18. Box office flop. Despite its A-list source material and rising star, Firestarter failed to ignite the box office. On a sizable $15 million budget, it earned a paltry $17 million domestically, barely breaking even before marketing costs. In the gargantuan summer of 1984, it was utterly consumed by cultural behemoths like Ghostbusters, Gremlins, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, landing at a dismal 35th place for the year. It was a clear commercial disappointment for Universal and De Laurentiis. 19. Mixed critical reception. Critics were largely unkind to Firestarter, which currently sits at a rotten 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. The consensus was that it was a slow, plodding film that failed to generate real suspense. Roger Ebert dismissed it as boring and unconvincing, a common sentiment among reviewers who felt the film was a mechanical exercise in special effects. One of the few consistently praised elements was George C. Scott's chilling and complex performance as the duplicitous John Rainbird. 20. King's harsh words. Stephen King did not mince words about his disdain for the adaptation. In a now infamous 1986 takedown, he called it one of the worst of the bunch and slammed it with a devastating metaphor, comparing it to cafeteria mashed potatoes, bland, generic, and utterly devoid of soul. Decades later, however, his stance softened. In a 2021 interview, while still holding reservations about the film as a whole, he offered praise for the undeniable power of Drew Barrymore's performance and conceded the practical fire effects were impressive for their time. 21st Carrie Comparisons. Upon its release, critics immediately drew parallels to Carrie, the first and arguably most successful King adaptation. The thematic similarities were impossible to ignore. Both films feature a tormented young girl who unleashes a devastating psychic power against her persecutors. However, most critics agreed that where Carrie was a taut, terrifying, and character-driven tragedy, Firestarter felt like a bigger, louder, but ultimately hollow echo, lacking the psychological depth and artistic finesse of its predecessor. 22nd. X-Files. Influence. The DNA of the shop is woven into the fabric of modern conspiracy fiction. The film's depiction of a clandestine, amoral government agency that performs horrific experiments on its own citizens became a foundational trope. Its influence is profoundly felt in the mythology of the X-Files and its shadowy syndicate. More recently, the parallels are undeniable in Netflix's Stranger Things, where the Hawkins National Laboratory and the character of Eleven are direct descendants of the shop and Charlie McGee. 23rd. Real CIA research. To ground the shop's evil in a believable reality, director Mark L. Lester looked to dark chapters of American history. The film's fictional Lot 6 experiment was directly inspired by the CIA's very real and highly illegal MK Ultra program. From the 1950s to the 70s, the CIA gave unwitting subjects, including college students, LSD, and other potent drugs to study mind control. By tethering his sci-fi premise to this documented political paranoia, Lester added a chilling layer of truth to the fiction. 24. Wilmington Crew Housing. The film's production had a profound and immediate effect on the Wilmington community. The entire cast and crew booked out the Hilton Wilmington Riverside for months, providing a massive economic boost. Local residents were eagerly hired as extras, getting a front-row seat to a major Hollywood production. This direct community involvement and economic investment were the sparks that ignited Wilmington's reputation as a welcoming and capable film city, leading directly to its future boom. 25. Barrymore's emotional scenes. To achieve the raw emotion required for key scenes, Mark L. Lester coached his young star to tap into her own real-life difficulties. For the heartbreaking scene at the Manders farm, where Charlie is overwhelmed by fear and grief, Lester encouraged the 9-year-old Barrymore, whose childhood was famously troubled, to channel her own feelings of instability and sadness. The technique worked, resulting in a performance of devastating authenticity and real tears that made Charlie's plight all the more poignant. 26. Rainbird's complex villainy. The critical highlight of the film is undeniably George C. Scott's layered portrayal of John Rainbird. He masterfully navigates the character's terrifying duality, first presenting himself to Charlie as a gentle, sympathetic orderly named John, creating a bond of trust. The slow reveal of his true identity as a ruthless, obsessed killer is the film's most effective source of tension. Critics lauded Scott for creating a villain who was simultaneously charming and monstrous, a truly memorable antagonist. 27th. Novel's faithful adaptation. In stark contrast to Stanley Kubrick's iconoclastic take on The Shining, the screenplay for Firestarter is almost slavishly faithful to its source material's plot. Nearly every major event from the novel appears on screen in the correct sequence, but this faithfulness proved to be a double-edged sword. Critics argued that by focusing so intently on recreating the plot, the film failed to translate the novel's rich internal life, the complex thoughts, fears, and motivations of its characters, resulting in an adaptation that felt accurate but emotionally empty. 28th SNL Parody. Drew Barrymore proved she had a great sense of humor about her past when she hosted Saturday Night Live in 2007. In a brilliant parody, she reprised her role as an adult Charlie McGee in a fake commercial for Firestarter brand smoked sausages. The sketch featured her using her intense pyrokinetic stare to instantly cook sausages to perfection, a hilarious send-up of her iconic role that lovingly repurposed her childhood trauma for comedic effect. 29th. Sequel and Remake. The cinematic story of Charlie McGee didn't end in 1984. In 2002, the Sci-Fi Channel produced a sequel miniseries, Firestarter, Rekindled, which imagined an adult Charlie, played by Marguerite Moreau, still trying to outrun her past. 2 decades later, in 2022, Universal and horror powerhouse Blumhouse attempted a full remake starring Zac Efron. Despite the promising pedigree, the film was a critical and commercial catastrophe, universally panned by critics, and grossing a disastrous $10.7 million worldwide. 30. Cultural legacy. Firestarter exists as a curious case, a critical misfire that nonetheless left a permanent mark. Its central concept of a pyrokinetic youth has become a standard trope, its influence visible everywhere from comics to blockbuster streaming shows. For a generation that discovered it on VHS, it remains an underrated 80s gem. Though it failed to become the blazing inferno the studio hoped for, Firestarter left behind a trail of embers, a powerful Barrymore performance, a genre-defining concept, and a cinematic legacy that continues to glow. Firestarter will forever be a film defined by the ghost of what it could have been, the atmospheric horror John Carpenter might have crafted, the emotional depth of King's novel that never quite translated to the screen. It is a cinematic monument to compromise, a product of studio anxiety and a director's blunt force vision. Yet, to dismiss it is to ignore its undeniable cultural burn. It provided Drew Barrymore with a platform to showcase a ferocious talent beyond her years, and it burned the image of the fire-wielding psychic into the popular imagination. It may not be a great film, but it is a significant one, a fascinating, flawed, and fiery artifact of its time whose influence has quietly smoldered for decades.